We're getting into the 1970s now, and the concept of détente, easing of the tensions between the major superpowers, is a big deal. And you're going to see some changes in terms of longstanding relationships between nations. And one of the biggest things you're going to see change is a split between the Soviet Union and China. And you're going to see here on this little map, if you look in the top right of this map, in the northern and eastern part of China, it's going to talk about border disputes or border conflict between the Soviet Union and China. There is a discrepancy between who owns various parts of that territory, the Soviet Union or China, and both nations lay claim to certain pieces of land. And there's actually a few border skirmishes, shots fired between the Red Army of the Soviet Union and the Chinese Army, and that obviously is a real cause for concern. You have two long-standing communist friends who all of a sudden are arguing over land. But the dispute goes a little bit deeper than that. The Soviet Union believes they are kind of the leaders of the communist world, and they're one of the two superpowers, so they should be leading that region of the world, that particular hemisphere. And China doesn't really want to take their marching orders from the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union has a little bit of a feel of threat because China went out and developed its own nuclear weapon. You see on this map, they talk about the testing. If you look on the western part of China, in October of 1964, China successfully tested its first nuclear device, which causes a little bit of concern for the Soviet Union. It's not that they didn't want China to have a nuclear weapon, they just realized that it creates a greater sense of turmoil in world affairs. So China and the Soviet Union are having a little bit of a tiff, a breakup, if you will. And the United States sees this as an opportunity to move in and put a wedge between that relationship between communist nations. So instead of the containment policy, the United States kind of shifts gears and sees an opportunity to split up the communist influence. And China is going to give them an opening to do just that. In 1971, the World Ping Pong Championships were happening in Japan. And while in Japan, Chinese delegates approached the United States ping pong team and make them an offer. Why don't you come to China to play some exhibition matches, Americans versus the Chinese? And you see pictures here of what we started to call ping pong diplomacy. Now, this is a big deal because no Americans had visited China under official circumstances since the communists took over in 1949. So this is an overture, like kind of like a first move, if you will, where China says, come over and visit, see how things are done here in the land of China. And the United States ping pong team obliges them. Fun little side note here, the Chinese ping pong team is well known for being the best in the world. And the government officials told them, we want you to win, but you got to go easy on the Americans, and you can't beat them up. You have to let them win a few matches. Ironically, I think the final tally was like China winning 6 out of the 9 matches. Take that with a grain of salt. I'd have to look it up to be sure. But after the ping pong matches, they go so well that Richard Nixon, the American president, is invited to China. And you see right here when he goes to China, now he does all the touristy stuff too, but here he is shaking hands with Mao Zedong. All right? Mao Zedong, still the communist dictator of China, is a ruthless dictator, a noted communist, and here he is shaking hands with Richard Nixon, the United States president. Why would we be willing to do business or to even talk to somebody like this? And the answer is really twofold. We mentioned one of the things here is that America wants to drive a wedge between the Soviet Union and China. And at the same time, America and China see this as an opportunity for business. If they open trade between the two nations, it would be beneficial for both of us. Okay? And you see the trade balance with China here over time is going to grow. We are more than happy to ship things to China. And of course, we import a ton of cheap goods from China. This is a mutually beneficial relationship. So there's a diplomatic angle that we want to really stick it to the Soviet Union. And at the same time, we want to open up trade with China, and they want to open trade with us. Part of the deal is that the United States would also officially recognize the communist government as the official China. All right, there's one unsettled question, though, and that's about the issue of Taiwan. If you remember, Taiwan is this this island off the coast of China, off mainland China, and Taiwan was still working under a democratic government, and for a long time, the United States recognized Taiwan as the official Chinese government. With this new deal with communist China, the United States has to kind of backtrack and see Taiwan as its own nation, its own independent nation. It's not China. The good news is, though, is that the United States and China basically have kind of an agreement, almost a handshake agreement, that China does not go into Taiwan. They don't try to forcefully take it over. That would cause conflict. Even in today's world, the United States is still very concerned about what China may do with Taiwan. They're concerned that an invasion might occur and that we might have to get involved and it could trigger another world war. The United States and China in the 1970s basically agreed that one day the people of Taiwan, who are Chinese, would be integrated back into the mainland of China. Now, they did that basically. The United States says we're kicking the can down the road here. We don't want Taiwan to go back to China, but we do want to have this beneficial relationship with them. All right. So the United States has developed this friendship now with China, and the Soviet Union's a little bitter about this, a little upset. Soviet Union's lost one of their closest friends, who's now being very friendly with the United States.